Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to all our viewers, wherever you are. Welcome to you, and welcome to this session of a MEMO conversation. And this one is part of the 10th anniversary of the PBA, 10 years of Palestine Book Awards. And so it's very fitting that we have with us one of our winners, the winner of the Creative Award last year, who I'm sure many of you have read her book already, the very wonderful Against the Loveless World with Susan Abulhawa. So thank you very much, Susan, for being with us in your morning and our afternoon. And I love the book. And I can't wait to hear you talk about it a bit. I haven't had that chance. So I wanted, first of all, to ask you, you've taken on the most enormous panorama for your wonderful heroine. And it goes through, it's in Kuwait, it's in Jordan, it's in the occupied territory, and most centrally, it takes place in an Israeli prison. And I wanted to ask you about the structure of the book. It seemed to me a very brave and determined thing to do, to start with the first scene in this very bleak prison that you're calling the Cube, and to use her time in the Cube as a way of her looking back on these other lives she's had in Kuwait and in Jordan, and they're all so different. So could you just tell us a bit about how you came to decide to do something so ambitious and then to come up with this particular device?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. And it's always a joy to do events with MEMO, and it wasn't a huge honor to win the award for fiction. So thank you for that, first of all. Using the cube was kind of I needed a kind of anchor for her entire narrative, and that's what I ultimately decided on. And I felt like it kind of created a kind of tension in the novel, to, you know, as Nahed, as you said, sort of goes through the various stages of her life, and her evolution as a human, sort of was structured by geography in many ways. Her physical location kind of determined her life to some extent. And so that was why I decided to break the book up into geographic locations. You know, this was the Jordan section, this is the Palestine section, this is the Kuwait section. And also her life as ultimately as a political prisoner was central to who she ultimately was. And so I thought having that be the anchor made the most sense for her and for the novel.
But there's such a huge contrast between the beginning in the scene in the cell, when the rather hapless journalist brought in to talk to her and write a piece about what a nice room she's in and how grateful she is to the Israelis for giving her another chance at a decent life. You come from suddenly we're in Kuwait and Jordan. How did you?
Sorry, you froze just a second there. I don't know if it was just me, but could you repeat just that last bit?
Yeah, I was just saying the contrast between the harshness of the prison, the first prison bit, and then you move to family life.
Right.
And it's such a dramatic change of tone. Now I know that you lived in Kuwait yourself, so you that's all known. That's not a research, although there are aspects of the novel which clearly you did a lot of research.
Right.
and the choices of Jordan and Kuwait.
Sorry.
I know you're a dog lover.
There's an ensuing argument over this. I just need to hide it. So I'm so sorry.
That's quite right. It's family life. This is the world of Zoom. So just tell us a little bit about the choices of Kuwait and Jordan before you get to the essential love story and the political drama of the occupied territories.
So I always knew that I wanted to write something that was going to be set partly in Kuwait. Partly because I was born there and I'm very familiar with it. I'm very familiar with the Palestinian diaspora in Kuwait. And also because Kuwait, the invasion of an occupation of Kuwait and then the subsequent invasion of Iraq became a huge pivot in Palestinian history. And I wanted to, I knew I wanted to follow the main character in her exodus, along with that huge stream of Palestinians who were forced to leave Kuwait, and to just explore what happened in one family's life, what that meant for this one Palestinian family to go through that. Of course, my family went through that. Most of them were expelled ultimately from Kuwait and ended up in Jordan, and it was hugely disruptive and damaging to our family, and further sort of divided a family that was already geographically divided by a succession of wars. So that was kind of that was a no-brainer for me as a starter. But even though I did live in Kuwait, I still had to do a good bit of research, and I had to sort of revisit memory and talk to family members who lived through the occupation of Kuwait. And so I was able to get a lot of firsthand accounts of that, in addition to in addition to book research. And I'm also very familiar with Jordan. There are two aspects that I felt had that carried a lot of responsibility and ethical questions for me as a writer in rendering in a fictional account. One is the life of political prisoners, and I feel like that's a rendering that's not to be taken lightly, and it's fraught with ethical questions of representation. And so that's probably what I did the most research on, honestly, because it's something that I don't know personally. I've never been a political prisoner, although my father was a prisoner, but I did, I spoke with, and I wrote about this in the afterword. I spoke with former Panther Party political prisoners, and of course, read a lot about Palestinian political prisoners, and watched some of the interviews with various former prisoners. The other part was the sex industry in Kuwait. And actually in the Gulf region and the Arab world in general. I mean, it's, sex industry is a universal industry, and but it's just not talked about very much in the Arab world. I mean, it's kind of a big open secret. But it takes on a very different character in the Gulf, which is where I encountered it, and I did have some firsthand experience, actually, quite by accident. That's another story for another time. But it touches, middle class life, which was a huge shock to me. I think, here in the U.S., we think of sex work as being something that's done in neighborhoods that are, in certain neighborhoods and certain streets and certain corners, and that don't touch, the middle class. And but that's not the case at least not what I witnessed in the Gulf, because so much of the labor, even the professional labor, is imported, and women in general are exploited no matter what. So even nurses and teachers are forced into this sort of into this extra work just to make ends meet. So I wanted, and that was also a really delicate thing to write about for me, primarily because I'm writing in English. It wouldn't be so fraught if I were writing in Arabic in the original, because writing in English means that there are a lot of Orientalist traps that I could fall into, since my first readership would be an English-speaking audience. And given, the stereotypes about Arab men and Arab women, and, the sort of Orientalist milieu that Edward Said wrote so much about, and, harems and all that, I wanted to, I really questioned everything I wrote, and I had friends actually read it precisely for to help me see anything that I may not have seen. So at the same time, of course, I needed to tell the truth, and tell the, and have my first and utmost loyalty always be to the characters, and especially to Naher.
Yes. Well, you mentioned that in your afterword, that I find it very touching that you're so preoccupied with those loyalties and being true to those people in what is actually a novel. Mm-hmm. So it's not like if you're writing about real people who are immediately going to be recognizable.
But they do become real people to me, and they very much do come alive. And I think for me in the writing process, it doesn't start out that way, but as they as with multiple iterations in different drafts, they do come alive. And for me, when I start to feel something towards the characters, that is kind of a signal to me that, okay, I'm getting close to a draft that I'll let other people, give to my agent or something.
I mean, she is an absolutely magical character, and I think that it would be impossible to read this book without feeling she's incredibly real, and the journey that she goes on with all its extremely dark times. But you've managed actually also to make it that for instance, in when she finally gets married, sorry, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read it, when she finally marries Bilal, I think the scenes after that are so tender, and that you paint this picture of Palestine countryside in the early spring, and you write about all the flowers, and you just bring alive such tenderness and such happiness. But then the contrast, you keep on having to come back into the cube. And I think that's pretty taxing for readers. And I was wondering what kind of reaction that you'd had on that mixing of things.
I haven't, first of all, sorry about this was going to be, inevitable. The dog's barking. I can't.
It's fine.
I honestly haven't gotten much feedback regarding the structure and how people felt about, that particular device in the story. But I can tell you that having that contrast emerged organically and in the story, because yes, we don't, Naha starts out like most girls, with a blank slate, with, just wanting a life and sort of wanting to follow the examples she has around her, and just and she has a certain idea of happiness and future, and so it felt right to sort of contrast that with, you know, where she ends up, which is something that happens to most Palestinians in the world. We aren't afforded neither the geographic space nor the emotional or intellectual space even to you know, to fulfill whatever it is we want to fulfill. And there's this constant kind of having to shift and remake yourself and readjust and adapt, because we are continually swept up in political events not of our own making. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear that you felt that that tension and that contrast, and that it was jarring. So I mean, that I'm glad that happened, that you had a reaction to that. So.
It was jarring in a good way. But just linking to what you've just said, there's a wonderful conversation that she has with her brother just after the wedding, in which they sort of basically are saying, do you remember 20 years ago and how different we were? Mm-hmm. And they're kind of in a way subsuming all the really seriously dreadful things that have happened to both of them individually over that period. And again, you managed to couch it into this extremely intimate and warm and living people. But I could talk to you, ask you questions about the book all evening, but I know I'm not allowed to do that. So I want to just take up what you just said in talking about yourself. You know, I remember when you were a rather brilliant, you know, you were a scientist, and you were writing in your spare time, if you ever had any, and in the night, and then, you know, after your kid goes to school or whatever. And it was a very, very kind of hard struggle that you were having then. And then you wrote Mornings in Jenin, and suddenly it was translated into so many languages. It was all over the world. And you'd done something amazing. And I think that transition
I don't know if you can hear me, Victoria, but it just froze.
that world behind you.
Oh, now I hear you. You froze. The last thing I heard was that transition.
Transition from being a scientist who writes to being a very big name writer.
Yeah, that was it was unexpected. It was a little bizarre and wonderful. I like you said, yeah, I mean, I was a single mom, and I've talked about this story so many times. It happened after I went to Jenin. I'd been kind of an activist already, and I was really transformed by what I witnessed in Jenin following that massacre of Palestinians by Israelis. And you know, a lot of the things that I was writing already in newspapers and whatnot had earned the ire of the bosses, and I was eventually laid off from my job. And you know, I had just zero savings, and suddenly now no salary, and I was a single mom, and also had no family in the US, and it was terrifying, actually. And I had no idea what to do except to just write about what about Jenin, like this stuff that was bubbling inside me. And I ended up borrowing. I mortgaged my house, and I just kept writing. And initially I was just writing, kind of reflections, and pretty soon I realized it was a novel, and I just decided to write a novel. I don't know. And I did that. I was able to sustain myself for two blissful years in which I was able to, get my kid on the bus. I wasn't rushing to daycare and hurrying home to, it was wonderful. I could be a mom and be a homeroom mom and be present for my daughter and also just write. And then I then I had to go back to work, but it was a long process to get it published. And when it finally, it was there was a lot of blunders and along the way. When it finally did, it just kind of took off with very little marketing or publicity. It was just a word of mouth thing. It was kind of magical, that novel, the way people reacted to it all over the world. It grew by word of mouth.
Well, I'm sure this is also going to be, and I hope it's going to be translated as much as the other one was. And does that mean you've been able to give up your day job?
Yeah, I finally, in 2013, I left the scientific medical community. I continued to freelance here and there, but I left the 9 to 5, and because I needed to write the second novel, The Blue Between Sky and Water. And so I've been lucky to be able to sustain myself writing. It's a precarious life, but it's I love it.
And are you still writing poetry? I like your poetry very much.
I do. Poetry was kind of, I started out writing poetry when I was a child. I used to write Arabic poetry. But Arabic has kind of been, pilfered from my tongue after so many years of being away from Arabic. And it's poetry's mostly always been a private thing. I decided to, I published that one poetry collection, just to see if I actually could be a poet.
Well, you are a poet as well as a wonderful novelist, and I think that I just want to say about the book for anyone who hasn't yet read it. The poetry in this book is very, very present. It's really written by somebody who's not only a novelist, but has the ability to transmit the beauty of intimacy and nature and all that you put in that.
Thank you.
And I just, I want to meet her, and I want to meet her brother. And I don't especially want to meet her grandmother, actually. But I just think you've done something that is amazing. And I have to say that when the judges read your book, there wasn't even any discussion. It was so obviously that wonderful thing that happens to a judge, that you just know you've got the perfect winner. So you were the perfect winner for us. And I don't know if you'd just like to say something, just to thinking of all your fans who are listening to you in all these different countries, apart from read my book.
No, it's been, it's kind of an unexpected life. I didn't start out thinking that I wanted to be a writer. In fact, I wasn't really afforded books as a child, and I remember craving them, actually. And to, the idea of being a writer was something so, out of reach in my imagination. And even when I was writing, it was kind of a surprise that editors were picking up my work. So it has, it's been a wonderful surprise and way to for life to kind of sweep you up. And I feel very fortunate and privileged. And it comes also with a sense of responsibility too, I feel, to write things that matter, that will have, that have staying power and have social and historic relevance. One time, I'll tell you a funny story. I was at, I'm not going to say which literature festival it is, but I was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked me, it was in the UK, I'll say that much. She said, "Don't you ever want to just write about something normal?" Yeah.
Well, I think I would like to say that your sense of responsibility comes over in all your books, but it also comes over in one other aspect of your life, which is Playgrounds for Palestine, which you started. And for anybody who doesn't know about that, I urge you to look on the website, and you'll find the highly responsible mum figure that created something absolutely wonderful for Palestinian children in terms of recreation, of hope, and of another thing in life, which is what you've also given us all with your wonderful books, and especially with this last one. So I want to thank you so much, Susan, for being on with us. And I want to thank the audience. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you will feel you know Susan a bit better, and will rush to your nearest bookstore to get it immediately. And I hope you'll keep up with MEMO conversations, and particularly with the forthcoming ones of other prize-winning authors over the last 10 years that we'll be doing on these Wednesday conversations. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you for plugging PFP. There's a UK chapter, by the way, so.
Yeah, get on the website, wherever you are, especially in Palestine. Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm happy your dog has calmed down.
Yeah, of course, at the end, right?
Anyway, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much, Susan.
Bye.
All the very best. Bye-bye then. Bye.